Good morning. Today is July 7th. Happy July. I hope you had a good 4th of July weekend. Today, in our Bible reading, we have Deuteronomy chapter 4, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the 5 books of the Penteteuch, the 5 books that were originally attributed to Moses. The people thought that Moses had written them. And they are mostly about Moses, except for the stories of Abraham and Joseph and Jacob and the other stories in Genesis. And the most important part, one of those 5, besides the beginnings in Genesis, is probably Exodus and the story of salvation, the story of how God saved his people from oppression. Deuteronomy is the last book, and In one of the earlier books, in Exodus, there was a point when Moses and his brother Aaron angered God. And so God told them in the story that they would not see the promised land. And this is Moses' final story, Moses' final speech to the people of Israel. He's been walking with them according to the stories for 40 years. In Bible speak, 40 years means a really long time. So for a really long time, he's been walking with these people in the wilderness, going back and forth between them following God and not following God. And he's had his moments of fabulous leadership, and he's had his moments of anger and shortness, which all of us have. So today he is giving his last speech, which is basically the entire book of Deuteronomy. And he's telling the people, don't sin, follow the law, follow what was given you at the holy mountain, follow the 10 commandments, do what God tells you. And not only do what God tells you, but teach what God tells you. Teach all of these things that you have learned to your children and to your grandchildren. Because otherwise, this heritage, amazing heritage that we have, will disappear and God will be angry. Moses points out that in his view, the Jews at that time, they were called the Hebrews at that time, had a very different relationship with God. First of all, God was one. Our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul and your mind. The Lord our God is one. Where many of the nations around them had a multitude of gods. And this monotheism is one of the things that set Israel apart. And they followed their one God through a wilderness all the way from Egypt to Israel, which is a long way if you're walking, and a really long way if you go up and down and around and don't take a straight path. So for a very long time, he walked with these people and he taught them. And this is his reminder. It's like when parents are leaving and, the teenagers are in charge. And mom has to say all of the things that she's said a million times, and the kids are rolling their eyes. But she's going to say it anyway. Remember that if anything happens, call 911. Don't forget to text me. Let me know how you're doing. There's food in the refrigerator. I don't want you to eat any of the junk food, but eat what I've made for you because it's really good. Yeah, right, Mom. Sure. Where's the chips? And I think that may be the way that Israel heard this speech. I don't know. There was probably some eye rolling going on. But as you look at this today, and I ask this again, I try to ask this often, what is God saying to you about these commandments, the 10 commandments and the ways that God has taught us to live? The most important commandment being that one I just mentioned, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And the one that Jesus added to it, which is another commandment that comes from the book of Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. Love God, love your neighbor. We talk about it a lot, but I know that there are times when I have trouble loving my neighbor, and I imagine that I am not alone in that. How can this reading from Deuteronomy help you to follow God's commandment to love God and to love your neighbor and to pass it down to your children and your grandchildren, and if you are lucky enough to have great-grandchildren, to them as well? Show them the love of Christ. Show them the love of God, this God that began walking with humans, and the stories that began of God walking with humans so many thousands of years ago. Have a wonderful day.